Hello and welcome to this next video where we talk about decision statements and primarily the three types of decision statements that we can use in Python. They're all very similar. In fact, they're all basically the same thing, three different variations on the same thing. Okay, so let's start here at the beginning. I just have a variable I that I set equal to 1. I'm not going to change that variable the entire time here. It's always going to be equal to 1. And so first I'm going to use the single decision statement. I'm going to test if this complete statement here evaluates to true, then I will print I and true. So if I and true equals true, I will print I and true, and also print just a second line here, just to show you that you can have multiple statements that belong in an if statement. I can have as many as I want, as long as I space them correctly. Okay. If I take this second line and I bring the spacing over here, in Python, that is the end of the if statement, and this is going to be outside of the if statement, and it's going to execute normally as if there was no if statement there at all. So I'm going to correct the spacing, and it's going to say if I and true. If that is true, it's going to print this. So the next type of decision statement is the dual alternative, or an if then else. Okay, so if this evaluates to true, I'm going to do these commands, and if this does not evaluate to true, else I'm going to do these commands. Okay, so you can see how much more useful it is to now have if this is true, else do this, because without the else I would have to write two opposite if statements if I wanted to do either one. So the else is very nice. I don't have to mathematically figure out what the opposite of that would be. Occasionally that would get very difficult. And actually sometimes it's difficult to find the opposite, and so you just write an if and you may leave it blank and then you do an else. Alright, that's not completely unheard of. And so the last one, Python does not have a case or a switch statement, so instead we're going to chain a lot of if else's together, and there's a little bit of a shorthand. Instead of writing else if, else if, else if, Python has chosen to do elif or elif. Okay, they've just omitted a couple of characters. It's not exactly the same as a case or a switch statement, but it does offer you at least some approximation of that type of ability. So I will test the first one and say if I is less than 1. If that's true, I'll print this line. If that's not true, and then I'll test this next one and see if I is greater than 1. And if that ends up being true, then I'll print this line. And if that's still not true, then I'll test if this is true. And then if it is, I'll print this line. And then at the very end, it's generally customary to have a trailing else at the very end. If none of these things turn out to be true, then do this. Okay? That's different than a switch statement. In a switch statement, you have breaks, and you have if the first one ends up being true and you don't break out afterwards, you'll end up executing all of them. Okay, we don't have that here. It's not always the desirable trait anyway, but if it is, we'll just have to program in all the extra commands multiple times, and we can do that, and it's not overly difficult to do so. So I'm going to run this, and we'll see what the output is. Okay. The first if statement, I is equal to 1. 1 and true evaluates to true because 1 is true, so true and true are both true. So these two lines printed. And the second one, I or false, I is equal to 1, which is true. Actually, they did short circuit on here, or the Python did for me. If the first sign of an or statement is true, it doesn't have to test the second side, because or only one of them needs to be true anyway. So if the first one's true, that's good enough. don't have to test the other side. And so these two lines printed out, and we did not use the else because the first part of the if statement did execute. And the opposite, the short circuit on the one and true, if I was set to some other value that equated to false, the first side would be false, and then you wouldn't have to evaluate the second side because in an and, they both have to be true, and if one of them is false, then you know it's going to end up being false in the end. So you don't have to test that. And then down in the last one here, I is still equal to 1. I've never changed it. I less than 1, it is not. So this did not print. And the next statement, I is greater than 1. Also, it is not. 1 is not greater than 1. So this did not print. The third one, I equal to 1. It is. 1 is equal to 1. And notice we have the double equal sign. Okay. The single equal sign is an assignment statement. Whatever's on the right-hand side gets assigned to the variable on the left-hand side. The double equal sign is a comparison, and we're asking if these two things are equal. All right. Especially with new programmers, it's a very easy mistake to make. If I were to type I equals 1 in here, in a lot of languages, if you do an assignment statement, the result will return true because I was able to do that, and it will say, okay, true, I was able to assign 1 into I, and it will come out as true even if it's not equal, even if you didn't intend it to be. It will just always equal true because the assignment was a success. That's what it's signaling. And so you're going to have a big problem if you accidentally put that into your if statement. There are some occasions where putting an assignment statement in an if statement is useful. We're not going to go over those right now. Those are, that's a use case. That's up to, you'll need that later if you do. So be careful that you don't put that in there unless you absolutely want to, and it's not the most common thing, but I have seen it a number of times. And so this evaluated to true. We printed this, and as a result, we didn't need that trailing else at the end, and that didn't print. Okay, so the three types of if statements: an if by itself, an if else, and then a ladder of if else's with a trailing else at the end. All right, that's my video. Thanks for watching.